Representatives of Hamas and Israel will be in Egypt today for a round of indirect ceasefire talks. They're meant to build on the fundamentals of U.S. President Trump's 20-point plan, which both parties have agreed to parts of.
We had some very good meetings. The countries of the world, a lot of the countries surrounding Israel, frankly, Muslim, Arab, and many others have had great meetings with Hamas, and it looks like it's working. So we'll wait for a little while, see how it all turns out. I think it's going to go very quickly. The meetings seem to be very good. We'll find out. We'll let you know soon.
CTV's Colton Praill is standing by live in Ottawa with the very latest on this, following all the latest developments. So, Colton, what is on the table today being discussed by Israel and Hamas negotiators as they meet in Cairo?
Yeah, Scott, the biggest thing is what's being known or what's being called by the U.S. administration is the first phase of these negotiations. Principally, it centers around this idea of a release of hostages, both alive and dead, and a trade or a swap system for prisoners of war. And so what we're looking at here is there's about 48 hostages, estimated 20 or so of them alive. They're supposed to be released. There's also supposed to be a release of the remains of hostages, and that's going to be swapped for Gazan detainees being held by Israel. The remains at a ratio of about 1 remain given up by Hamas for 15 remains given up by Israel. You're going to see, after the full release of hostages, a release, or you're supposed to see at least, a release of Palestinians being detained by Israel. There's some 1,500 of those who are going to be swapped over. But really the conversation and what's being negotiated right now in Egypt is centered around how that's all going to work, who is going to be involved in the swap, and the protections necessary to ensure it takes place. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was speaking on Meet the Press this weekend. Here's how he framed the key elements to these discussions on Monday.
There now needs to be meetings, which are occurring even as I speak to you now, and hopefully will be finalized very quickly on the logistics of that. What that means is, who goes in to get them? Is it Red Cross? When do they show up, et cetera? What place are they going to be? And the conditions have to be created for that to happen. You can't have bombs going off and fighting going on in the middle of this exchange.
And on those conditions, Hamas issuing a statement last night clarifying that they were also looking to negotiate the immediacy, but also just the actual activation of that ceasefire and of that Israeli withdrawal. You saw, of course, in Donald Trump's 20-point plans, he also lined out a number of different zones. The yellow zone is where Israel is supposed to be pulling its troops back to. That would be about where they were in the month of August. And so all of that is going to be negotiated over the next couple of days, according to the president. That's really the key focus. And then, of course, he has this longer 20-point plan, and talks would progress further to that later in the future. This is very much centered around the exchange of hostages and the conditions required to actually be able to do so.
So, Colton, of course, we've been hearing from the U.S. president. He seems confident that this can get done, but of course, it's incredibly tricky. Ultimately, how achievable is finding common ground now to reach a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, or at the very least, get through the first phase, as you touched on?
It's not the first time that we've, seen an exchange of hostages or seen discussions of a peace deal that the U.S. president thought was moving well or had progressed to a significant extent where peace was potentially possible. However, what you're hearing from, Israeli members of parliament or from the U.S. administration is the belief that this is as close as they have become, or as close as they've got to actually exchanging hostages and to moving closer to a longer-standing peace deal. That said, there are still significant amounts of distrust on both sides of these negotiations. We saw Hamas, for example, when they, agreed, quote-unquote, to these demands by Donald Trump, shying away from some of the more significant calls for disarmament or for yielding power in a future Palestinian state or in future power in Gaza, despite agreeing to this technocratic rule that Donald Trump had envisioned in the near term. And so those are things that have been absolute deal breakers for Israel in the past. There was reporting over the weekend from Axios, for example, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't happy with the way things were going and that Trump had admonished him. That was an exclusive report from Axios. And so there is enough out there, certainly, to wonder if this is going to be the time that it's successful. There, especially when it comes to disarmaments and Hamas having a role to play in a future Palestinian state, those have been issues lines, not only for Israel. Those have been red lines that other countries, the U.S., Canada, and basically everyone who has recognized a Palestinian state or who has said they will, has drawn that line in the sand. And so there are still pretty significant hitches here that could cause problems in negotiations.
All right, Colton, we'll check back with you throughout the day. CTV's Colton Praill joining us live from Ottawa. Colton, thanks so much.
Anytime.